This morning's sermon is on the concept of a mother's faith. You know, in Hebrews 11, there's this explanation of faith and a long list of examples of people by faith, and there's one in particular that is mentioned that is a mother. It begins off by defining faith. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation. Verse 3, by faith we understand that the universe was created by the Word of God, so that what is seen is not made by things that are visible. And so the chapter goes through this long list of people: Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. And then you come to Moses. Moses identified with Israel over Pharaoh. He left Egypt. He kept the Passover. But before you get to Moses, you get to verse 23, and it says, by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents, because they saw that the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. The person having faith here is not Moses, right? It is Moses' parents, and really specifically Moses' mother. Hebrews is calling back to that amazing story of Moses' birth and Moses' mother's incredible faith to protect her child. This was whenever Moses was born in a time where the Hebrews were slaves in Egypt. See, Moses didn't have a birth worthy of envy. He was born as a Jew or as a Hebrew, in a land ruled by an anti-Semitic tyrant. Moses was born into desperate conditions. His people suffered horribly. They were oppressed, hated, misused, maligned. And there was a time when the Hebrew people were enslaved by Egypt. And as king of Egypt, Pharaoh said, you know, these Hebrew people, there's quite a lot of them. And if there came a war, they might side with the enemies, and then we'd be fighting a war on two fronts. So let's go ahead and reduce their number. Let's reduce the amount of warriors they have available. And so let's have all the male children killed by throwing them into the Nile River. Verse 22 of Exodus chapter 1. Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. So he's trying to reduce their numbers. He doesn't want to eliminate them altogether, but he wants to especially eliminate the potential soldiers and their ability to reproduce. Baby Moses was born into a world of cruelty, pain, slavery, despair. He began life in this dark era, the darkest day for the Hebrew history so far. And nevertheless, life went on for the Jewish people. Men and women married, they cradled their young ones, they tried to live a family life in this crucible of oppression and brutality. In the early verses of Exodus chapter 2, we read of a marriage under these stressful conditions. Now a man from the house of Levi went, and he took his wife, as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. Later on, we find out the name of these people. Numbers 26 names them. The father of Moses is Amram. The mother of Moses is Jochebed. And they had at least 3 children. You have Aaron, Moses, and Miriam. And both Aaron and Miriam are older than Moses. And so you have this story where the king, Pharaoh, he's this iron-fisted ruler of Egypt, and we're told that this baby was protected for 3 months by faith. His mother Jochebed and his father Amram, they feared God more than they feared Pharaoh. It must have been no easy task to hide a healthy boy, right? But out of this deep reverence of God and this confidence in God, they did just that. And though Exodus 2 doesn't mention it, Moses is not the firstborn. He had this older sister, Miriam, who's probably not yet a teenager, and the older brother, Aaron, who was 3 years older than Moses. And as you read, Moses' mother, Jochebed, they hid the baby. Now, that word beautiful, She looked at her child and saw that he was a fine child, saw that he was beautiful. That doesn't surprise me. I think every mother feels that way when they see their child, don't they? They look at that baby and they see just this unique beauty. It doesn't matter how ugly that baby is. We all know it. We know it. The mother looks at that baby, she sees beauty. But they knew immediately, the whole time she's pregnant, the moment after he's born, they knew what they were supposed to do. They knew what the Pharaoh commanded them to do. They knew what the law was. And they decided that they were going to face the danger instead and to hide that baby, to keep the child alive, to risk everything. I mean, Pharaoh's troops would have seized that boy and tossed him into the Nile River, where that baby would have either drowned or been eaten alive by crocodiles. And who knows? Maybe the Pharaoh's troops decided this couple had hid this child for 3 months. Let's make an example of them too. Let's throw them into the Nile River as well and let the crocodiles eat them too. They're not just risking the life of this child, they're risking their own lives. And how would you like to try to hide a baby for 3 months? You know how hard it is to hide a crying baby? I mean, they're living in this little miserable hut, and it's going to be close quarters with all their fellow Hebrews. Their neighbor had to have known when they heard a crying baby that they weren't doing it. They're afraid of their neighbors turning them in. They're afraid of the Egyptian troops finding out, and instead they decided that they were going to risk it. But there came a point, apparently, where after 3 months, Moses' parents said, you know, we can't keep the secret any longer. And in this moment of agony, I mean, try to visualize the parents deciding that they're going to have to give up their baby boy. And with this grief and this despair, it looks to me like Jochebed devised this creative plan where she technically followed the rules, didn't she? Every baby boy was supposed to be tossed into the Nile River. And she put her baby boy in the Nile River, but in such a way that he had a chance to survive. Verse 3, when she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes, daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She placed the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. The baby's technically in the river, but he's in a basket, and he's in the reeds that's catching him so it's not going along with the flow. And so it sounds like she had this great care and tenderness to take this wicker basket. She wanted to render it watertight so that the baby wouldn't sink. And so she probably placed some soft pieces of cloth and hay. And I can only imagine her heart must have been breaking and tears down her eyes. And she didn't just thrust the baby into the Nile River, did she? Instead, she went to the reeds. She must have waded into that water. And reeds, they're super flexible, but they're also fairly strong. And you put that basket in the reeds so that the current isn't taking the child away. But there's still the risk that that baby could have been eaten by crocodiles. Crocodiles love hanging out in the reeds. But Moses' mother, it seems like she had this plan. And when I read this, I can't help but see a plan in her mind. Or at least maybe not a specific plan, but a hope. We see this woman of just great faith, but not just foolish faith. Instead, it seems she had this plan where she was ultimately leaving up the results to the sovereign God. But I see a mother who is trying to figure out, how can I keep my baby boy alive? She thought maybe if I put the baby in the right spot, in the right time, maybe someone would see him. Maybe someone would hear him crying, and maybe that person would have mercy. Verse 4. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. You have caring Miriam watching out for her baby brother. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came to bathe at the river. And while her young women walked beside the river, she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman and she took it. I mean, if you're imagining this scene in your mind, it is heartbreaking. Jochebed had to leave her child in a river and walk away not knowing what would happen. This child could have been eaten by a crocodile for all she knows, and she just had to walk away with nothing but this blind faith in God. Tears streaming down her face, heart beating fast, missing the face of her child and a prayer on her lips. She just left her child in the hands of God. Miriam, Moses' sister, stuck around to see what happened, right? Maybe Jochebed couldn't stand to watch. But Miriam, it seems that she may have been hiding behind a tree, behind some reeds at a distance, maybe tiptoes, hands clutched, holding her breast to see what happens to her baby brother. And this princess, Pharaoh's daughter, when she sees this child, she could have easily have said, well, my father said all the babies got to be killed, all the Hebrew boys got to be killed. Follow the stern decree, plunge that baby into the water. No guarantees. All Jochebed could do was trust that God would give this Egyptian woman the heart of a mother. She must have been praying. I can't help but feel like there was this plan underneath where Jochebed may have planned to put the baby in the right place in the right time. Maybe she knew that people, that Egyptian royalty maybe bathed here, and she was hoping that maybe an Egyptian woman would come along and take care of the child. Again, this is just a blind hope, a blind faith in God. And an interesting note I want to put out here is that the Egyptians worshipped the god of the Nile River. In fact, they may have been interpreting sacrificing these boys to the Nile River as a sacrifice to their god. And see, the god of the Nile required you to give a specific oath. The oath said this: I have afflicted no man, I have not made any man weep, I have not withheld milk from the mouth of suckling babies. Isn't that unique? Could it be that this princess had made such an oath? Could it be that this Egyptian princess interpreted this strange event as the god of the Nile giving her a child? Right? That's how they thought. And so, could this be Jochebed's plan? Maybe Moses' mother had worked all this out. Maybe she was hoping that this is what would happen. But we know it's not the god of the Nile working here. It's the God of all creation. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. She saw the baby. She recognized right away. But now what was a daughter of Pharaoh to do? She had a baby on her hands. The baby was hungry. And so she was just trying to figure out what to do. And one historian does make a mention. I don't know if this is true, but this is what the Jews at least thought. They thought that she tried to find a wet nurse, but the child latched onto no one. Until Pharaoh's daughter came about, then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, the sister of Moses came to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you? And so Miriam comes along, and maybe she connected the dots. Maybe she has a plan now. And so she's coming up to Pharaoh's daughter, like, oh, you found a baby. Maybe I can find you someone to nurse him. And it goes along, Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. And so the girl went and called the child's mother. Can you picture Jochebed, right? I mean, the emotional roller coaster here. Giving up her child? And then hearing she gets her child back? I mean, in her eagerness, she must have wanted to sprint, right? But she probably had to play along. She had to play far. She didn't want the Egyptian princess to catch on. She had to act normal. She had to act almost as if she didn't want the job, right? And so she had to come along, and then she's handed the baby boy. She has to make it not look like she's so excited to have her own baby back. Verse 9, Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. And so all the way from having to give up your child to being paid to raise him. Isn't that incredible? That is the hand of God. No coincidence. What I think of is Proverbs 16. I can't help but think Jochebed had this plan, and she was hoping that this plan would come to fruition, and she was thinking that someone may have found him, and someone would have taken care of him. Maybe she didn't see all the amazing things that would happen, but she had faith in God, and she had a plan. And Proverbs 16 says, "When a man's ways pleases the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him." When your ways please the Lord makes your enemies at peace with you. Moses' mother is such a great example of persecution, of suffering from the Israelites. I mean, it's one thing to hear the Pharaoh issued a decree to kill the boys, but it's a completely other thing to witness this mother struggle to keep her baby son alive. Jochebed, she didn't have any hope besides just simple faith in God. God, please take care of my son. Maybe she had a wild scheme she was trying to go through, but she didn't know if it was going to come about. And isn't there this important connection between careful planning and faith, right? Are they mutually exclusive? I don't think so. I think Moses' mother shows that you can have both. The old motto in the Revolutionary War was, "Trust in God, but keep your powder dry." Yeah, all the results, the ultimate results are left up to God, but we're going to do everything we can and in our power. The ultimate results are up to God, but we're going to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves. Because to walk by faith, like we sang, does not mean you stop thinking. Yeah, you should trust in God, but you shouldn't be lazy or you shouldn't be apathetic. I mean, we need to trust in God with our money to provide for us. But that doesn't mean you need to spend all your money on lottery. I mean, we should trust God to keep us safe, but I'm also thinking that you should wear your seatbelt. I mean, you should trust in God to provide with your health, but I don't think that you should chain smoke and eat Twinkies nonstop. I mean, acting foolishly or thoughtlessly and expecting God to just bail you out, that's not faith. That's presumption. Wisdom says, do everything that's in your hands, but have faith in God to take care of what you cannot. Faith and careful planning go hand in hand. I like these two verses. He says, "Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established." He says, "The heart of a man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps." There's planning, there's diligence that's needed, but God's ultimately in control. And so when you have Jochebed, and this woman who has this faith in God, and maybe she had this crazy scheme, and she's included in Hebrews 11's hall of faith, Moses was raised on this kind of faith. Moses was a great man of faith. Why? Because his mother was a great woman of faith. And so with faith on that dark morning when Jochebed placed her little baby one into a tiny basket and placed that basket into the river, she must have been desperate, but desperate times call for desperate plans. She put her plan into action, and she knew the success of it depended on God. And the reward, God just overflowed with these blessings. Pharaoh's daughter paid her to raise her own child. Isn't that a dream? I mean, all the mothers in here would say, "Oh, that'd be amazing," right? We're not told how long she keeps the child. We get a little bit of a hint, right? Verse 10, "When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because," she said, "I drew him out of the water." So this is probably after the age of weaning or a little bit afterwards. Back in those days, they weaned till they were about 3 or 4. She had the child while he was growing up, and in God's amazing plan, Moses was with his family perhaps long enough to at least get a good beginning and understanding that he's a Hebrew, to learn about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to learn about their faith and their commands from God. Long enough for Jochebed, Moses' mother, to cherish all of these moments in her heart. And I just can't help but be impressed with Hebrews 11 and how God lifts up the role of the mother. That the person of faith here in Hebrews 11:23 is Moses' mother. She decided to hide Moses. She did something that risked her life, and all she had was her faith in God to help her. There's this deep sea of emotions. Moses, Jochebed was so blessed to have her child back, but she had to give him up twice now. She had to give him up the first time, not knowing whether he would live. Thank God he lived. But now she has to give him up again, back to Pharaoh's daughter. And so Moses would be separated from the only family he knew. He'd be raised in Egypt alongside Egyptian royalty, but he would be treated as a foreigner because he belonged to the race of the slaves. He would receive the greatest education. He'd be fed the best food, live in the best rooms. He'd be trained to be some sort of Egyptian administrator of the government, some sort of official, and he probably got to that kind of level, but he would never be king. Being Pharaoh's grandson, or he would at least have a shot of being king, but because he was adopted and was from the race of the Hebrews, he would never be considered Egyptian. It may have been his background, his ancestry, maybe even just the simple color of his skin. He was treated different. And this might be why Moses ended up identifying with the Hebrews over the Egyptian. This is the kind of background that prepared him to be a great leader, how he was trained and all the training required, but he never belonged to them. And when Moses was given up, Jochebed had that terrible moment of giving him back and not knowing whether she would ever see him again. For all Jochebed knew, she would never see her little boy again, and she would never have an excuse to come visit him. She was just a slave. She was just a member of this despised, rejected race. Moses would become a son of another woman, a woman with different values, a woman that worshipped idols, that worshipped false gods. She didn't know how Moses would be treated. She didn't know what he'd be taught, whether he'd be loved. Again, she only had one thing: faith in God. And yet, throughout this story, it's important to note that that is the greatest tool in the arsenal of a mother: faith in God. I know at the very least, every mother in here can relate. But I think a lot more than us can relate. Maybe you feel like you were born and thrown into a river. Maybe you never knew what it was like to have the security of a parent's love. Maybe you understand what it's like to be separated from your family, to have a fractured past. Maybe from a human point of view, your birth came at a very difficult time in the lives of your parents. It may be that you've never known the assurance of a faithful mother or a father who placed faith into your heart. And I think it's important, as you consider Moses' birth and the faith of his mother, that regardless of the circumstance in which you came into this world, you were not an accident. At least in God's eyes, you were not a mistake. I think this story is more relevant now than ever. I want everyone to hear me when I say this. When it came to the circumstances of his parents, Moses was born at the wrong time. This child was a terrible inconvenience. This was a time when all the parents were placing their children into the Nile River, killing their children because they were afraid of the consequences. Moses' mother could have done what every other mother was doing and to kill the inconvenient child. But instead, she had faith in God. She had faith that no matter how inconvenient this child was, that God would provide. That no matter that this child put her life in danger, she accepted the danger. She said, it's better that I risk my life than this child die. She had faith that God would provide because she accepted this challenging gift of a child. God blessed her. God gave her the opportunity of raising the child, of seeing her child grow up, even from afar, and witnessing her child do incredible things, even become one of the most significant people in all of history. Because God used this inconvenient child to do amazing things. This child that brought on hardship and danger to his parents, God had a plan for him. And Jochebed, she had the heart of a mother, and she had faith in God, and that's why she cherished this child and kept him alive. And I really want to end with this connection here. So in Exodus chapter 2, verse 2, the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. She saw that her baby boy was beautiful. That's the heart of a mother. And in Acts chapter 7, over there in the New Testament, you have Stephen. And Stephen is preaching this sermon where he's kind of recounting the history of Israel, and he focuses a little bit on Moses, right? And when it comes to Moses, and when it comes to Moses' parents, notice in this verse, Moses' mother saw that he was beautiful. Acts 7. At this time Moses was born, and he was beautiful in God's sight. In Exodus 2:2, whose side are we talking about? We're talking about the mother. The mother saw that her child was beautiful. In Acts chapter 7, who sees the child's beautiful? That is God. Because at the end of the day, whether your mother thought you were beautiful or not, God thought you were beautiful. It's not just Moses' mother who saw how beautiful Moses was. Every child is beautiful in God's sight. And that's why we celebrate mothers who look at their child. It doesn't matter how beautiful that they might actually be. Objectively speaking, it doesn't matter. The mother looks at that baby and she sees the most beautiful thing she's ever seen. Because even if you didn't have a mother who thought you were beautiful, even if you didn't have a mother at all, know that when God saw you, when God sees you, you are beautiful. God provided for Moses. God had a plan for Moses. God saw beauty for Moses, and it's the same with us. Moses' mother acted out of faith. She trusted in God to provide and to help, and God did. It's the same with us. And so the faith in the story of Moses' mother should remind us of this, that in God's plan, we have a place. And that in God's eyes, we are beautiful. On this Mother's Day, that's the lesson I wanted to give to you.